Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, Human Life Issues and the Challenges to the Dignity of the Human Person. This is hosted by the Catholic Apostolate Center in collaboration with the National Black Catholic Congress. I'm Alex Cranston, and I'm the production coordinator for the Catholic Apostolate Center. I'll be your host this afternoon as we welcome our guest speakers, Dr. Natasha Wilson, Sandra Coles-Bell, and Deacon Al Turner. Dr. Natasha Wilson is the coordinator for education and outreach in the Office of Respect Life Ministry for the Archdiocese of Baltimore. Sandra Coles-Bell is the program director of the Office of Cultural Diversity and Outreach in the Archdiocese of Washington, and Deacon Al Turner is from the Archdiocese of Washington. We're pleased to have them speaking with us about human life issues and the challenges to the dignity of the human person. If you have any technical issues during the presentation, please send me a message in the chat box on the bottom right of the screen, and I'll be sure to help you out. I will now turn things over to our presenters.
Good afternoon, everyone, and may God be with us as we witness to His greatness in this webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about the pro-life issues and how they affect people. There are many pro-life issues, and they should not be confined to the debate over abortion. Abortion, of course, is very important. It's a scourge, and it has to be challenged at every turn. But how did we get to the point where it's legal to kill defenseless human beings in the womb at will? How did we get to the point where people who should be the champions of the right of the human person to life, as well as liberty and the pursuit of happiness, are largely out of the debate? Why do the pro-life efforts seem to not resonate in the Black community? We're going to focus on that today. What will open up this community to the threats and the causes of the anti-life culture that we live in? The evil of abortion is the starting point of the discussion, of course. But I propose that abortion is not in and of itself the issue. I propose that abortion is a symptom of something else. In reality, a lot of something else. Today, we're going to look at what may be the causes that lead people to believe that an abortion is the answer to their troubles. This panel will explore two broad areas which are contributors to the culture of death which lurks abroad in our country. We'll start at the beginning with a presentation on the importance of recognizing the God-given dignity of the human person. We'll focus on the ministry which helps one to heal from abortion and have some ways to reacquaint ourselves with the holiness that God calls us to. We'll give some practical assistance information as well. And then we'll reflect on the various isms, these isms which contribute to this situation: classism, sexism, elitism, and the special privileges. At the conclusion, I'll attempt to connect all these dots so that we may have a clearer understanding of the scope and the connections of the pro-life issues. At the end, we'll open it up for some of your questions. So right now, I'll turn it over to Dr. Wilson.
Thank you, Deacon Al. So I would like to start my presentation. Sorry, I'm looking for the controls to advance. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. So I am going to be talking today about restoring belovedness, and particularly how post-abortion healing is a part of reaffirming human dignity for those who have suffered after abortion. And so I'm going to go to the next slide. So I'd like to just give a definition, a working definition of what I mean by belovedness. So our human dignity as children of God is given to us by God. It's a gift. And so it's something that cannot be taken away from us. But belovedness, which I'd like to use as a working definition during this presentation, is really our personal sense of that identity and that human dignity given to us by God, to be able to see ourselves as God sees us. And so I'd like to take quotes from two figures who are very important during the 20th century in the fight for this restoration of our sense of our human dignity, particularly among particular groups around the world. So first I want to start with a quote from Pope St. John Paul II, and I'm going to just read the purple part where he says, "We are not the sum of our weaknesses and failures. We are the sum of the Father's love for us in our real capacity to become the image of his Son." So this quote really identifies that belovedness is that love that comes from the Father, and that identity comes as our real capacity to become the image of his Son when we receive his love. And then the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. speaks about the beloved community, and so the way in which this belovedness begins to permeate into the social fabric. And he says, "The end is reconciliation. The end is redemption. The end is the creation of the beloved community." And then he begins to speak about different forms of love, which culminate into that love of the Father, agape, God's love. And he says, "It is this love, agape, which may well be the salvation of our civilization." So you have the individual's sense of belovedness that permeates into the social fabric, forming the beloved community. And it is this belovedness that we seek to restore in post-abortion healing ministry. So I'd like to just paint a picture for you. I'd like you to just imagine your communities, your families, your friends, your church community, and just imagine for a second, place them in your mind, and then think about all of the people that you know. And the statistics vary here, but somewhere between 25 and 40% of women will have had an abortion by age 45. So the purple dots that you see here would represent women who have had an abortion by the age of 45. And just imagine that these are mothers, these are sisters, these are cousins, etc., friends, fellow parishioners. And imagine all the lives that they touched, their children, their husbands, the rest of the community, their family members, their friends. And this is the picture of those who may be suffering after an abortion. And these are who we want to focus on today. And so now imagine zooming in onto one of these purple dots, and we're going to listen to the story of a woman named Livette. And as we listen to Livette's story, then I'm going to lead us through afterwards into understanding some of the details about her life that will help us to understand how post-abortion healing restores a sense of belovedness and that reaffirming of human dignity.
My name is Livette. I was raised in a Pentecostal home. We was the family that was at church every single Sunday, but we didn't practice anything that was preached at home. My dad was an alcoholic, and he beat my mom on a regular, which led me to going out in the streets looking for love. My first experience with an abortion clinic was at the age of 16, but I had an infection, so I could not get the abortion. I thank God every day because I have a beautiful 22-year-old son. 3 months later, I became pregnant again by a different guy, and I wasn't so lucky that time. My mom told me there's no way you having that baby, but I wanted to have that baby so bad. But she said no way. She took me to the abortion clinic, and I kept crying and kept crying. So the nurse brought me back out to my mom and said, "She keep crying, we can't do it." My mother gave me a look, and I knew what that look meant. So we went to the car, and she said, "Livette, when you come back tomorrow, you better not cry." So I did just that. I cried in the parking lot, put my big girl pants on, and went back in the next day and had the abortion. The nurse said 2 things that rattled me. She told me, "She just keep moving." I knew then I had a daughter, and I felt like that was her last fight for life. A couple of months later, I got pregnant again by a different guy. But I knew the routine now. I said, hey, I'm going to just have an abortion. Nobody in my family knew. I knew to cry in the parking lot and go inside and win your Oscar. Don't cry at all. And I did just like that. And my whole life was going downhill from there. I became more promiscuous, drinking, drugs, and I even attempted suicide. And then my husband came into my life, and he loved me right where I was at, and he loved the Lord. So I said, that's what I'll do. I'll do religion. I could do that really good, so I'll just mimic his behavior. And I went to a pregnancy center and thought, I'll help all these women. But the saving was for me. I needed the saving. And I was asked the question, have you ever had an abortion? Usually I lie about that. But this particular time I said yes. And I didn't admit to just the one abortion. I admitted to both of them. And they sent me to abortion recovery program, which was amazing. I was hesitant and I was angry, but at the end I received God's healing and his grace. And I wish I could say I jumped right into ministry and started telling my story. No, it took me 4 years to even do any of that. And now I help other women deal with healing and tell my story to other people. Now, I still struggle. My 6-year-old asked me, while I'm getting all this stuff prepared for these programs, she said, Mommy, what happened to my brother and sister? Why are they in heaven? And I sat down and I told her, when Mommy was young, she did something really bad. She gave me a look like mommies don't do anything bad. And I said, I had your brother and sister in my tummy, and I didn't want them there anymore. So I went to the doctor. She looked at me. She said, what did the doctor do? And I thought, well, what words do I use? I say abortion. She won't know what that means. So I told her, he killed them. And tears rolled down her cheeks. And she said, Mom, I wish I'd have got a chance to meet him. And I said, I do too. I wish I could have kissed him and hugged him. And from a 6-year-old, she looked at me and she said, you can still kiss him. Well, how can I kiss him? She kissed her hands and looked up to the sky and said, that's how. And then she grabbed my face as gentle as she could and was like, but promise me something, Mommy. Promise me you would never do that again. And I promised her I wouldn't. So I say to parents, you know, if your kid comes to you and says she's pregnant, love her right where she's at. There's options out there for her. You know, because as my 6-year-old showed me grace and mercy, you can do the same for your child. Because sometimes the only way kids see that is through our parents, you know, our actions.
So now that we have heard Levette's story, we're going to just dive in a little bit more and find out, first of all, who is Levette? So Levette's name actually means little loved one in English. She's a wife and a mother. She's also African American. She grew up with a religious background, and she said that was a Pentecostal background, although they did not practice the faith in her family. She suffered from familial instability in the home. She has trauma from the abuse that she saw in her own home. Her father abused her mother and also abused alcohol. She had two abortions as a teenager, but she also has a child that she had as a teenager. And then she also has her child or possibly other children through her marriage later in life. So I'd like to just show you this infographic on the side and kind of situate Levette's story in the demographics of those who have had abortions. So as I said, she's religiously affiliated. She's already had a child at the time of her abortions. She's African American, and she had her abortions in her late teens. So she's within the scope of those who have had abortions in this country. So what was Levette's life like before the abortion? Well, she suffered attacks on her human dignity. And though these might not be all the attacks that she suffered on her human dignity, these are the ones that she mentioned in her story. She experienced familial instability. She experienced abuse in the home. And those attacks on her human dignity, and even the attacks that maybe her parents experienced in their life on their human dignity that led to the behavior that they were having in the home, resulted in a loss of her sense of identity and human dignity, which I would also term as belovedness. And an outgrowth of that was unchastity, which led to an unwanted pregnancy. And then there was the incident of the abortion. where she was pressured into it by her mother, who, again, also was suffering attacks on her own human dignity. It appears that the father of the child was absent from the decision, at least, but also absent from the story. And it also seems as her own father was also absent from the decision. And then how did those abortions affect her life? Well, she said that her life began to fall apart. She began abusing alcohol. She became more promiscuous and had suicidal thoughts. And then I've added in here other emotional issues that women have expressed after having abortion: depression, nightmares about the abortion itself or about their child, unforgiveness, anger, drug abuse, eating disorders, and unresolved grief. These are the experiences of those who have suffered after abortion. What role did meeting Levette's husband play in restoring her belovedness? It seems as though that relationship had kind of a twofold impact on her. One was that his love began to open the door to a restoration of her belovedness because, as she said, he loved her where she was at. He loved her in her brokenness. So he began to show her an aspect of God's love towards her. However, the relationship also posed a challenge because since she had not received healing from abortion, the relationship, even she said that he was religious, and so she began to kind of use the religion as kind of a mask for the pain. So even though she was experiencing this wonderful feeling of belovedness from her husband, she was also still masking the pain through this relationship. So then what was the role of post-abortion healing ministry in restoring Levette's belovedness? So initially she expressed hesitancy, negative emotion. She said she was angry and even resistant to it. And this is actually common amongst those who end up seeking healing through post-abortion healing ministry. From the moment that they hear about post-abortion healing ministry to when they actually enter into it, that the average time is about 7 years. So this kind of hesitancy or resistance can be quite common. But once one enters into the healing process, as Levette said, the process is ongoing. This process of healing is actually ongoing. She said after her healing experience that it took her 4 years before she even felt comfortable again to begin to share publicly her experience. The purpose of this healing is first, to reaffirm one's human dignity so that woman is able to see herself as God sees her. And also to restore relationships, first of all, of course, with God, but also with self, because often the hardest person for us to forgive is ourself. And then from there, to restore relationships with family members and others in our lives. And then also to acknowledge that grief and loss over participating in the death of one's child. Often in society, abortion is seen as either something to be celebrated or something to support, or it's something that's taboo and we just don't talk about it. But there's no space for women who have had an abortion to be able to acknowledge what has happened and to acknowledge the grief of the loss of their child, and even the loss of this, again, the sense of dignity that comes with being of motherhood and of womanhood. So now I'd like to talk about something that I've called the forgiveness factor, that in my limited experience with Project Rachel ministry, that I think is kind of the key to that restoration of belovedness, that restoration of a sense of human dignity. And I believe that Jesus Christ walks with each and every woman, and also men, and I'll talk a little bit about men after this, through their own pastoral mystery to restore that belovedness, to restore that sense of human dignity. So Jesus had his own passion, and at that passion, he experienced attacks on his human dignity. He was falsely accused. He was attacked. He was spat on. He was beaten. He was attacked in so many ways, emotionally, physically, and even spiritually. And we see this in Levette's story and with mothers who have gone through an abortion, this attack on human dignity. And then there's a death. There's the abortion, but then there's all the other things that come with that. So there's the physical death of the child. But I use the Pieta here because that shows in Jesus' case, he died physically, but the Blessed Mother, she was so united to his death that she took that on spiritually and emotionally. So for women, often there's the anniversary reaction. So at either the anniversary of the abortion or maybe of the due date of the child, they may re-experience it all over again. The demise of relationships, maybe the parent-child relationship or the relationship with the father of the child, etc. And then struggles with infertility or even miscarriage can occur, and that's already tragic enough. But then also to have in the background that there was a child that they could have had that they don't, that just adds a whole nother layer of suffering to it. And then struggles in forming new relationships. And as they proceed through this healing process and the acknowledgement of all the suffering that's come to this moment, there's the resurrection where they can experience forgiveness, reconciliation, healing, the acknowledgement of this grief. And then on to the ascension, which sometimes, again, can come years later, where there's this new vision of life, this restoration of the belovedness, and then the freedom to be able to help others, maybe not in a public ministry, but maybe in one's family, in one's community, in one's church. They can look at another woman and say, I know what you're going through right now. I've been there, and I don't want you to go down the same path. And so I think that this is very important way in which Christ enters into the suffering of a woman, and we see this in Project Rachel post-abortion healing ministry. So then what about men who have suffered from abortion? Often we may think, well, men are, may be the ones who are kind of coercing or pushing the woman or supporting the woman in having the abortion. So are they really suffering? And that may be true, that men are either actively or passively involved in the abortion. Maybe they paid for it. Maybe they said, go, just get rid of it, or maybe they abandoned the woman. But if we think about the way that the laws are structured, the final decision for the abortion is between the mother and her health care providers. So men do not have a final say in the abortion. And so there are many men who may have either never known that there was a pregnancy and then maybe found out later that the woman had an abortion, or that they may have opposed the decision and had no say. But regardless of how this situation occurred, men can then experience regret later. And they also may experience similar emotional effects from abortion, but just in the way that men experience grief. They might tend to cope alone, feelings of despair, depression, anxiety, repressed emotions. That sense of helplessness and voicelessness, especially if maybe they wanted to father the child, but they felt like they couldn't say something because they felt like it's her body, it's her choice kind of thing. And then, again, relationship problems. So we have resources, of course, for post-abortion healing, the main one being Project Rachel Ministry. This is the church's response to women and men who are suffering after abortion. I won't go into all the resources here since this is recorded, but they'll be available to you, all the different resources for post-abortion healing and learning more about it. So I'd like to thank you, and I will answer questions at the end. And I'll turn over to Deacon Al.
Go on, Sandra. Go ahead to Sandra now.
I want to thank everybody for being on this, because we want to talk about the challenges to the dignity of the human person and what are some of those isms that become problems within our society and become problems within the person. As Deacon Turner once alluded to, there is the something else. Al, I'm going to ask if you can help me with those slides, if you don't mind, and if we can go to the next one. Some of those isms are not only about racism, but they can also be about, elitism and classism, and that truly impacts the dignity of the human person. Let's define what that is. Elitism is that belief or attitude that individuals who form an elite, that is a select group of people with a certain ancestry, a high intellect, wealth, special skills or experience are more likely to be constructive to society as those persons and have greater authority over others. And classism is what is that biased or discriminatory attitude that's based on distinctions made between the social or economic classes, with one class being superior over another. Those are the things and those views are very inherent in our current society. They don't allow for the dignity of every human person who may be marginalized or outside of the class or that elite F level. And therefore, people are not given a voice to who they are as a human being, nor whose they are as God's creation. And so, can we go to the next slide, please? As we look at the debasement of the human over the material possessions that can be purchased, or those skills or talents that can only be assumed to be inherited or possessed by a certain group, society looks for ways to institutionalize those distinctions, making them into law even, and then continuing to maintain that strata. That's the kind of effect we see on the impact on the challenge of the dignity of the human person. We see the institutionalization in the laws that place value over abortion as a way for the economically destitute, and Dr. Wilson showed us the numbers, so that they don't have to suffer by bringing another life into the world, because that person coming into the world will probably be destined for the same lifestyle. That is a way of impacting, negating our dignity as a human person. We can also see that by the use of euthanasia and the use of the death penalty. Again, opportunities that have been institutionalized to make us less than we are. Next slide, please. So we as Catholics can place emphasis on the dignity of the human life. We can place that life is more precious than things, and that we measure any institution or law as to whether it enhances the quality of the human life or threatens its very existence. When we look at the challenges, and I'll look at the next slide, please. When we look at the challenges to the human dignity, we have an awful lot to offer to counter this culture of death, of negation of the human dignity, of looking elsewhere, of looking for an opportunity to diminish the human dignity, the call that God placed on each one of us to live a life that's full and rich. I'll have the next slide, please. Thank you. So some of the resources that I'd like to draw to your attention, just to begin to look at the fact that when we look at the challenges to the dignity of the human person, we can look at it by viewing the film 13, if you have a Netflix account, and to see what policies our government is itself putting into the use of mass incarceration to keep slavery ongoing. We can look at things very, very simply as joining a local NAACP branch. That's incredibly important, and particularly as we're looking towards those midterm elections. I will tell you that it's not only about going to meetings with the NAACP, but they do things by webinar. So consider looking at that website and consider becoming a member. And then we can do things to enhance the dignity to the human person by doing something as simple as volunteering with our Catholic charities to assist the marginalized within our country, within our archdiocese, our diocese, and within our world. And with that, Deacon Al, I want to turn it over to you to wrap us up.
Must be addressed head on. They have to be addressed head on. We can't just shove them under the rug. In the case of abortion, we need to enlighten our young people, and not just our young people, but our not so young people, that what this contraceptive abortion mindset is doing to yet another generation of people in this country, especially Black folks. The church's teaching on the sanctity of life must be the starting point of this discussion. We need to take every opportunity to shed some light on the life issues, which we've touched on here, in our churches, in our gatherings, in Bible study groups, and from the pulpit. We believers need to put out another idea that counters the idea of the dominant society. There's a scene in the 1959 film Ben-Hur, which I like to reference, about the struggle to win the minds of others, and that's what we're trying to do here. In this scene, when the commander of the garrison of Jerusalem is turning over command to the character of Messala, the outgoing commander is bemoaning the difficulty of governing the stiff-necked Judeans. He's jailed them, he's beat them, he's tortured them, and nothing he's done has changed their thoughts and ideas. And he says to Messala, what do I have to do? What can I do to change what's up in their minds? How do you fight an idea? And Messala answers, this is how you fight an idea, with another idea. And that's what we need to be doing, putting out another idea in society that will make the life option the option. We need to hear about the practical assistance that must be offered that makes it possible to take a problem pregnancy to term. We need to get some words of encouragement and hope to those who must cope with the situations that arise from poverty, economic distress, and other effects of the culture of death. We need to hear of the love of God, which will sustain us through all these difficulties in our lives. The healing ministries, which we've touched on here, are a start. Supporting these ministries with our time, talent, and treasure is also vital. We must take a holistic approach to addressing the life issues. The culture of death and the culture of life must both be seen in their multifaceted realities. These issues cannot be seen in isolation. We must tie all of the life issues together. In the isms, the church corporate must continue to reflect the best of God's people. The people who are serving in positions of leadership must look like the people who are being ministered to, and their I stories are most important in helping those people who are in these situations to know that they're not alone in these things. The church needs to remain focused on the blessing that our diversity brings to the practice of our faith. We need to dispel the myths that Black Catholics and Blacks in general are absent from the history of the church. We need to showcase our heroes. These are life issues again, remember. People like Father Augustus Tolton, the first identifiably Black Catholic priest to serve in the United States. Mother Mary Lang, who founded the first order of nuns for African-American women. Daniel Rudd, an ex-slave who became a publisher and published a newspaper which touted the greatness of the Catholic Church as a place of salvation for ex-slaves. Sister Thea Bowman, who was the first African-American in an order of Franciscan nuns and was a great evangelist. Sister Antona Ebo, who was one of the Sisters of Selma, who marched for the rights of the human person. These are just a few. These were people who embodied the pro-life message. They were pro-human persons. Teachings of the church on life issues were very important to them, and they shared them. We need to be reminded that Jesus always has an option for the poor, for the powerless, the meek. He's never impressed by the elite status of an individual. The church, as missionary, must be more evident to the faithful. We must continue to support ministries that serve in the areas where people of color live and be more engaged in these communities. Economics should not be the sole criteria when looking at institutions in these areas. We must invest in people. That means being one with them. We must continue to point out the usually unequal income distribution in the United States. This creates a level of poverty, intergenerational poverty, which is a life issue. This is a life issue since we as believers are called to care for the poor, to care for those less fortunate than ourselves. This is just the tip of the iceberg, though. If the church is going to foster a sense of the culture of life in the Black community and all communities, these issues, causes, and challenges must be addressed. The life issues affect all of us, and this is the kind of consciousness raising that is needed in all communities. Life is precious, and life needs to be protected by all for the good of all. We have an obligation to one another to look out for those who cannot look out for themselves. That includes the people who live on the streets, the mentally challenged, those who have been unable to get a good education for one reason or another, the single parent, the single pregnant teen, the welfare single parent, the incarcerated, the underemployed, and the unemployed. In our African American community, we are represented in high numbers in all of those categories, but it's a problem for all of us. But there is a balm. There is a balm to soothe the wounded body, the wounded mind, and the soul of those in these difficult situations. The words of eternal life in the Gospels are for our good, all of our good. There needs to be a concerted effort made to bring all people into the mainstream of life. And that is a very Catholic attitude towards life. The challenges are real. And we must not shrink from these things. The challenges to the dignity of the human person that we've talked about are so real. The promises also are real. The promise of solutions are real. And I hope that we've shown that there are opportunities to be part of the solutions if we are going to take them. There are many ways to embrace the culture of life rather than accepting the choices that the society offers, which is not really a choice at all. The choice for life and to life is always there. The church must be proactive, and we must be willing to be true disciples and evangelizers. And that means that, as Sister Thea Bowman used to say, we must tell the true truth. Sometimes that truth will be painful. The church cannot accept the social norms of the society around it when these norms are in conflict with Catholic social teaching. The church's teaching is, most of the time, countercultural, but that's not a bad thing. The mission of Jesus Christ has always been countercultural, and we carry on that mission. Christ so often made the people in charge aware of their duty to be a blessing to those in their care. We are to care for the poor, for the disadvantaged, for the imprisoned, the widow, and the orphan, and all of those people that the state fails to take care of. The church must evangelize all our brothers and sisters with the good news that God loves us all through our missionary actions of collaboration, cooperation, and hospitality. The church can and should continue to be the conscience of the state, not its ploy. The actions of the church must also be consistent with its words. And who is the church? Well, we are the church. We are the living stones which make up the church. You and I are on the front lines. We're, in fact, the front lines. The first and maybe the only first contact that people will have with the Catholic Church and what the church teaches about the dignity of the human person. Will we be part of the solutions to these vexing challenges, or by our disengagement and inaction be part of the problem? The pro-life way of life and of being starts with our willingness to do the mission of Jesus Christ each day in every way that we can. Thank you very much for your attention, and we now open it up for questions.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for your wonderful presentation. I know I certainly learned a lot. And now we're opening it up to all of your questions. So I have one question that says, what should I say to someone I know who's considering an abortion? What should I do, if anything at all?
Well, the first thing that needs to be said in a situation like that, I think, is to remember that God loves you. Okay? Tell them that God loves them. Okay? They may have made a mistake. It may be a situation where they're not married and they got pregnant. Okay, they made a mistake. But God loves you, and there's always going to be a plan for you to get back in God's good graces. And certainly, you don't want to put yourself in a situation where you use the life of someone else to solve your problem. And but approach it with love. That you, as a person, maybe you're their friend or maybe a sibling or something, that you'll go along with them all the way. That you'll help them to get through this emotionally, spiritually, and socially.
Might I add, I think that's great, Deacon Turner, definitely to continue to communicate God's love, and also to be able to, if you're a parent especially, to make sure your child knows that you will support them, that you accept this life, that you're excited that you're going to have a grandchild, despite the fact that this was not the way that you would have wanted it to be. It's not the way that anybody would have planned. So just that unconditional love. If you are a friend or a sibling, again, that unconditional love. But I would also say, if you can get the person out of whatever situation that they are feeling in a crisis, so like if you can get them someplace like a coffee shop or someplace where they can relax and breathe and just take a breath and then listen to them, listen to all the things that they're thinking about, help them to, like in a practical way, go through pros and cons, and so that they can begin to think about things in a not stressed out way. And it may take some time, some prayer to be with that person, but if you can just get them into a safer space, because a lot of times the person is literally in crisis and they really may feel like they have no other hope. So if you could just bring them out of that crisis mode into a place where they feel safe, let them talk, and show them that you support them and that you're going to walk with them. Also, just some practical things in terms of getting them to a place that can help them choose life. There's a website called optionline.org, and that will connect them directly to the local pregnancy center in their area. You can also text helpline to 313131. All this is in my slides. And again, it will connect that person to the local pregnancy center, pro-life pregnancy center that's in their area, that can provide them with material support. They can get a sonogram. They can see what their baby looks like, hear their baby's heartbeat or something to that effect. And they can get help with diapers or clothing for the child or for children that they may already have. And they can get counseling, all kinds of different services. So those are some practical aspects.
Great. Thank you all for answering that very important question. Sandra, as a leader, how can we work around the isms in the workplace? What recommendations do you have to deal with these injustices?
Thank you very much for the question. The injustices prevail. My belief is that they have to be honestly addressed. Being able to talk truth to power takes time. It takes work. Sometimes it's risky. But to be able to do that from a place of love, not hate, a place of making sure that you understand so that the other, when it's communicated, can understand is, again, equally as important. Particularly in the workplace. Those are tough, but they can be effective. Making sure that one is very centered and that they can be very direct, not angry, but direct, to be able to talk truth, is one of the ways we can address some of those isms.
Mm-hmm.
I won't say that it's going to be an immediate effect because this has many layers, but to bring it to the attention of others, and then to look at and provide some opportunities on how things can be revised. And then when they do begin to get revised, to go back and say, this is better, let's look at some other ways. And so beginning that dialogue and continuing, it takes a while.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'd just like to interject something if I can. One of the things that has to be done starts with the person himself. One of the things about the human dignity of life is that we have to stop thinking of people as other than we are. I think that once we understand that people are all the same, they really are. I've traveled all over the world, and people want the same things in every country I've ever been in. They want a decent job, they want clothes for their children, they want to put food on the table, and they want to be left in peace. And that makes us all the same. So if we start from that perspective, and I know it's hard, it's real difficult to do that, especially in the high pressure corporate world that we experience here in this country. But if we start from that everybody is a child of God, everybody is created by God, and God created everything good. If we start from that, then people will be less and less other and more us.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Now, the next question is asking about the best way to introduce someone to Project Rachel after an abortion. How would one go about doing that?
So, again, especially because this is usually a very sensitive subject for the individual, and it also may depend on how close you are to the person. I would recommend first, if you can, getting them to open up and share their story, as much as they're willing to share, just so they can be heard and be listened to. And then once they're willing to open up to you a little bit more about the experience, and maybe they have, I mean, if you know that they might need post-abortion healing, then they may have already opened up to you, then you can just share with them about the ministry, or you can take the video, like the video of Livette that I shared with you all. That's available on YouTube, and there are other stories similar to Livette's story that are available on YouTube. And maybe you could sit down and just ask them to look at it, or you could ask them to look at it on their free time and see if it resonates with them, that desire to seek out post-abortion healing. You can also contact your local diocesan office and see if you can get some business cards, Project Rachel business cards or pamphlets, and then you can just give them the business card or the pamphlet and just say, when you're ready, reach out. Because as I said, it can take on average about 7 years from when the person hears about the ministry until they actually engage with the ministry to begin the healing process. So just be patient with them and just provide as much information as you can. Also, you can provide a website of the local Project Rachel, the one that's local to you, to that person, and let them just explore the website and learn more about, because oftentimes if you've been suppressing these emotions, these feelings, you may not even know that the things that you're going through are associated with the abortion itself. So it just may take time to sort through all those emotions and realize that it's stemming from this area, and then to be able to take action. So I would just kind of just say, 1, listen, 2, provide any information that you can, and then 3, just be patient and continue to pray for that person, that the Lord will open them up to the truth and help them to move forward.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Would any of our panelists like to say anything about the presentation or about the topic today before we end? If there are a few things that you would like everyone to take away from the presentation, I'd give you that time to do so now.
Yes, I would. If you could show the last slide I have here. There are resources that I believe, and I think we all believe that would be very helpful for Catholics especially. St. John Paul II's Gospel of Life letter is just it's the primer for how we live the gospel life. Humane Vitae, St. Paul VI, that letter, which was written 50 years ago, is truer today than it was then. I put on there my email address and Dr. Wilson's and Sandra's email addresses in case people want to contact us one-on-one. Because in the short time that we've been here, we've only touched the tip of the iceberg. Hopefully what we've done here is to open people's sensitivities towards the whole human person and what's going on, the attacks on the human person. And abortion, of course, is the crux of the problem, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff going on that we need to deal with. I liken it to, if you've got a hole in your boat, bailing the water out is a wonderful thing, but if you don't plug the hole up, you're just going to be bailing forever. And so if we understand what the church teaches and what Jesus has taught us about the dignity of the human person, then we can really start to solve these problems.
I would just like to say, first of all, if there's anyone out there who is experiencing the need for, is suffering after an abortion, a woman, a man, anyone, because as I showed in my first slide, we've all been impacted in some way. There's someone that we know who has been impacted by abortion, and it can have effects on anyone that, God loves you, and he wants to heal you, he wants to bring you peace. And Project Rachel is the church's response to your need. And so I just would say, do not be afraid, reach out. It's a beautiful ministry, and it really is so impactful. I would just say, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid to share it as well. And if anything that we said today would, rings in your spirit that you want to get involved, particularly with Project Rachel, there's always need for people, especially people who look like us, to minister in Project Rachel, so that people can feel a sense of comfort and a sense of familiarity with someone who is walking with them through this process. And there's many ways that people can get involved. So especially if you're a counselor, whether you're lay or professional, that's a great way to get involved. And also for clergy, we are always in need of clergy. If anybody happens to also speak Spanish, there's always a necessity for that as well. But anyway, in which if you want to just walk with someone, you want to be a person they can call and have coffee with, and just sit down and talk, et cetera, et cetera. There's so many ways for everyone to get involved if that's something that you desire to do.
Very good.
And this is Sandra. I put my resources up there, and the one thing that I would encourage people to do is to get involved. Look at 13th if you've not seen it. Get involved. It will have charge, and it will cause us to think, what can we do? Look at opportunities to connect with local groups in your community, and then look for opportunities as Catholics to serve the marginalized, if we can, or through our own Catholic charities. I think those are the ways in which we open our hearts and that we become the Christ in the world.
Very good.
Wonderful. Thank you all very much, Dr. Wilson, Sandra, and Deacon Turner, for your wonderful presentation and answering everyone's questions. And thank you to everyone who tuned in and joined us this afternoon. We'll have a recording of this webinar uploaded to our YouTube channel in the next week, so please keep an eye out there and on CatholicApostleceNter.org and NBCCongress.org for the link to view that recording. You're welcome to share it with anyone you'd like, and as always, all of our content is free to share. If you haven't yet found the National Black Catholic Congress or the Catholic Apostolate Center on social media, please like or follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram in the hope that we'll continue to reach out to more people with spreading the message of the gospel. In the words of St. Vincent Pallotti, may the charity of Christ urge you on. Good afternoon, and God bless.